o'clock. I'd like to order. It's Tuesday, September 20, Tuesday, November the 1st. And I'm going to ask you to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing.
We take a moment of silence for first responders, fire, police, ambulance, and tonight for the Phillies. Thank you.
Thank you. Go Phillies.
Try to be extra long.
All right. Thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate it. And as a reminder, this is being recorded via Zoom. The recording will be uploaded to the Township's YouTube channel for viewing. Under the chairman's report, the board met in executive session prior to tonight's meeting to discuss personnel matter and legal matter. The board met with the Westtown Township Board jointly on Wednesday, October 19th, to discuss legal and personnel matters regarding the Wego Police Department. The Municipal Authority Pipeline Task Force, Conservancy, and Futurist Committees are all looking for new members. Please reach out to the Township Manager, Derek Davis, or fill in an ABC volunteer application form. And as a reminder, the Township offices are closed on Friday, November 11th in recognition of Veterans Day. There are no public hearings this evening, and under emergency services, Grant, I'm going to actually move you to the budget discussion. So we're going to, as part of that budget discussion, have you come up and make your presentation. Under emergency services reports, there are none besides, and there is no financial report. So we move right to the minutes, and I'll be looking for the minutes of September the 27th and October the 18th to be reviewed. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes from the September 27th meeting and the October 18th meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I didn't see any corrections that needed to be made. Did anybody else?
Nope.
Are there any questions regarding the minutes here in the room or in the Zoom room? See none. I'm going to call the question. Those in favor of passing the minutes to the record? Aye.
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 Thank you. And under the treasurer's report, Dave, do you want to
Certainly,
take
thank you,
it
Madam
from
Chair.
here?
Attached, got the treasurer's report for the weeks of October 13th, 2022 through the 27th, 2022. Many of the funds realized interest earnings due to our matured term investments. We've got general fund revenue over this period driven by the interest that was earned on those investments, EIT revenue, permit revenue, reimbursement for the damaged traffic signal at Airport and Wilson Road, and Goshen Fire fuel recharges. Expenses for this period included electrical work and scheduled light replacement in public works performed by Lenai, the pumpkins for the festival, machine rental, legal and engineering fees, as well as regular operating expenses. Our capital expenses included $16,000 purchase of 2 zero-turn replacement mowers that were fully depreciated and put away for in the capital reserve fund and allocated for out of the budget. Sewer fund expenses included $107,000 payment to Westtown Township for the Q4 2022 Summit House and Cider Knoll flows. And our bond fund incurred $364,000 over 2 payments to West Goshen Township for the Westtown Way Pump Station capital improvements. Any more questions on the bills?
No, I have none.
Madam,
Yeah, just go ahead, Cody.
I'll just make the motions.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the receipts and approve the expenditures as presented in the expenditure register and summarized in the treasurer's report.
Thank you. Thank you. Dave, I do have a question. So on page number 2, the Lenai corporate bills. So I'm just curious. I had intended to call you about this and had forgotten. Excuse me. How much we spend per year on electrician? That's something you can find out for me.
Sure. You want anything spent just particular through Lenai or electrical
No,
work
I'd like
period?
to know how much we spend on electricians,
Okay.
because I feel like we're spending a lot more of late on electrical services, and I'm wondering if it would make more sense to get someone on board full-time in-house who does maybe electrical and something else perhaps. Like
Okay.
I know that Public Works has a lot of people that do mobile position.
Sure. I know that recently a lot of the bills have been because of our additional security cameras and wiring up the TVs, which are helping view the sewer pump houses, and we'll also do the park surveillance. And then the Public Works is doing the entire garage, replacing it with LED, which should save us some money, at least in the long term.
That's what this is. Okay.
Yeah.
There was also a lot of things at the sewer plant this year that I know we used Lanai for. And then there was a special project when we updated the room here to do the hybrid meeting room. We actually installed some receptacles underneath the desks to add more power to be able to use laptops and things of that nature. So
I can put a couple of your analysis together.
I would be interested because I see the trend going up. And I know that we have a number of these little one-off things that
Mhm.
have occurred, but I'm just wondering if this wouldn't make, if it wouldn't make sense to consider someone who's electrician and something else, if there's another role that's going to be upcoming in, say, 2023 or 24,
Okay.
that we could combine that person's responsibilities at that. So I'm just looking at,
Sure.
can we do something like that?
Absolutely.
That's good input. Good. Good, Michelle.
Does anybody else have any questions? I had one more question, was the revenue split for the Chester County Art Association, the art walk. So there was a revenue split. So we paid, who did we pay the $637 to?
The association,
The association?
Yeah.
Because they sponsored it?
they sponsor and they bring all of most of the artists. and things
Okay,
in.
that's fine. That's what I wondered. I figured it was something like that. Okay, that's all the questions I have. Are there any questions from anybody else on the board? Are there any questions regarding the bills here in the room? Anything on our Zoom audience? Nothing. So I'm gonna call the question. Those in favor of paying the bills? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next, under old business is consider stop sign addition at the intersection of Baldwin Drive and Margaret Lane.
thank you, Madam Chair. So we had this discussion last meeting. There was discussion of Public Works involving police, and there was found to be a necessity of a three-way stop sign as far as WeGo was concerned, and our Public Works Department at Baldwin and Margaret. We were trying to pass it last meeting, but our solicitor did remind us we needed to add it to the ordinance. So this is the attempt to do that. If you see the draft motion, the ordinance is blank. The number will be, if it is passed by the board, 129-F-2022. Again, that's 129-F-2022. So that is the subject and motion on the table right now, Madam Chair. Thanks.
Okay.
And I didn't know if Bill had anything to add to that, but pretty simple.
No, that's it.
Madam Chair, I move that we adopt ordinance 129-F-2022, creating a multi-way stop at intersection of Baldwin Drive and Margaret Lane.
Thank you.
I said, I can't even get in there.
Can't even get a
Yeah,
second.
you better
here,
sign
Johnny.
up for Jeopardy and start
Whew,
exercising.
gotta-
your hands.
Gotta start picking up the speed. Are there any questions from anybody else on the board regarding this matter? Anybody in the room regarding the matter of the stop sign or on our Zoom room? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that will be advertised. It already was.
It was already advertised,
Okay,
yes.
that's right. We're just passing the ordinance. Okay, moving on. All right, so this is the continued budget discussion for the 2023 fiscal year. And as part of this discussion, we are going to have Grant Everhart come over and make a budget presentation to us as part of that. So thank you for coming out tonight, Grant. How are you? Good to see
Hello,
you.
Grant.
My wife is taking my place at the game tonight.
I had to sell my tickets.
Oh,
Her brother had tickets last night, so she
Oh.
got first dibs.
oh,
Okay.
okay.
You didn't want to go with him anyway.
No.
So thanks for questions and answers. So we prepared a short presentation for the board to discuss our municipal contribution request for 2023. Let me get an advance to it. Thank you. So just a quick recap, obviously the Goshen Fire Company provides fire EMS and fire police services to 4 townships. Cover about 98% of East Goshen Township, 40% of West Goshen, 61% of Westtown Township, and 16% of Willistown Township. It's about 25 square miles and about 35,000 residents. Cover that out of 2 stations, the primary station on Park Avenue in East Goshen Township, and then we have the station on Boot Road in West Goshen. We are staffed by a combination of volunteers and career firefighter EMTs operating out of both stations. In order to meet our budget, we conduct a great deal of fundraising and we receive generous support from our community. We also rely on municipal support through contributions from the 4 townships that we serve. We also bill for EMS transports and we offer ambulance service subscriptions to our residents. So diving into the 2023 budget projections, currently our 2023 expense budget is forecasted at $3.3 million. This is a 7.7% increase over what we are projecting for 2022 year end. Our 2023 income budget is currently forecasted at 3 million and some change. This is a 5% decrease from our 2022 year-end projection. But the decrease is caused by the fact that we got some large FEMA grants last year. So we don't have those this year. So we do see a slight reduction in our year-over-year income. The current budget gap that we're working on is $278,314. So our operating expense budget is pretty straightforward. We have very little discretionary spend. Most of it, and you'll see later in the presentation, most of it is payroll, utilities, fleet operations, and fleet maintenance, things like that, that we don't have a whole lot of wiggle room in terms of cutting or deferring any of those expenses. And part of our, I think, as I explained in the last meeting, we fund all of our capital reserves out of our operating budget. So our apparatus fleet, our building reserves, our general reserves all come from our operating budget. And if we have a shortfall, that means we either can't fund the capital reserves or we underfund the capital reserves. So the increase in expenses from 2022 to 2023 are driven primarily by annual wage increases for the career staff and higher healthcare and worker comp costs. We've seen some significant increases approaching 10%, I think, for healthcare this year. And workers' comp also increased. We're under a new plan, but some of the term for the rebates that we get paid back from the carrier, we won't see for a couple of years. As everybody knows, we're paying higher costs for fuel, just like everybody else, vehicle repairs and consumables. And also our capital reserve requirements seem to grow every day. I just was talking to somebody from the Twin Valley Fire Department this afternoon. They placed an order for a new ladder truck and somehow it went from 1.5 to $2.3 million by the time they got done negotiating the cost. So
How long to deliver? 4 years?
the manufacturers are telling us 2 years, 2.5 years.
Right.
It used to be 8 months. Now it's several years. So obviously we have to figure that into our apparatus reserve fund and make sure that, we're funded appropriately. So capital planning, as I just mentioned, cost of fire apparatus and ambulances are up 40 to 60%. So accordingly, we have to increase our funding into the apparatus reserve funds to account for that. And I think I mentioned this before, we've actually planned on reducing our fleet size to do everything we can to manage those costs. And so in the next couple of years, we'll actually eliminate at least one piece of apparatus from our fleet.
Grant, if you don't mind me interrupting, well, do you think that'll impact service on residents?
I don't think so. So it's our heavy rescue. And we run a lot fewer rescue calls than we used to. And with the new type of equipment that's being developed, we can actually distribute that among our pumpers. And then if we have something extremely significant, we have FAME Rescue out of Westchester, West Whiteland to the north. We
Okay.
can call on our mutual aid partners, but this is really a right sizing move for us in terms of service delivery. And then also with our building reserve, we have been planning for 10 to 15 years now to expand and either renovate or replace the station on Park Avenue. And we just haven't been able to do it because we just been chasing inflation. And can't even get the project started. A key component of it, as I mentioned in the presentation, is our need to build live-in quarters. That's a huge part of what we want to do, which would cut down response time and get firefighters in station around the clock. But that's a key component of the project. And again, we just can't grow our capital reserves fast enough to execute that project. So the pie chart just shows our income by source. Our greatest source of income is EMS billing. It's been running about 1.2 million per year. Now with the additional calls we've been running, it's going to be a little north of 1.3 million next year, we think, which is good. Municipal contributions provide 32% of our revenue. EMS subscriptions, 13%. The fundraising we do, which includes the fair, the 15-week club and all of that, comes in around 14%. And then, grants, some years the grants are 10%. We forecast next year they'll be about 1%. It's just, they're very competitive. Sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't, but we can't build a budget around it. And other income is just very small miscellaneous member dues and cash back on the credit card, that kind of thing. And then our expenses by category, obviously wages and benefits are nearly 75% of our operating expense. Skip forward one there. Thank you. And everything else is coming in basically single digits except for capital reserve funding, which is about 10%. So administration's 4%, buildings, maintenance, utilities, things like that are 3%. Fleet maintenance is up around 5%. Operating expenses, and that's the purchase of EMS supplies, fire hose, things like that, coming in around 3%. And then we spend about 1% on volunteer recognition and rewards and things as incentives to the volunteers. And then this page is a formula that we've been working on. I think I've mentioned this before. We've been working with West Goshen on this as well because of their relationship with the Westchester Fire Department. It's basically calculating, a contribution formula based on assessed valuation and fire and EMS responses. And if you take the percentage for each township and then average out those percentages, East Goshen comes in around 48%, West Goshen 30%, Westtown at 14%, and Willistown at 7%. We don't use this formula currently. It hasn't been ratified, obviously, by East Goshen or by West Goshen, but it's something we've been sort of getting into the conversation so that it should have a reasonable discussion about how much a township should be contributing. So this last page shows what our current requests are from each township. The total request for contribution is $891,865. I've also included the alarm fines, which East Goshen and West Goshen have been, really proactive in offering to us. So our total forecast right now, based on our request, not based on anything that's been authorized by any of the townships, is $900,865. And if you look at the way it's broken up, it basically follows that municipal funding formula from the prior page. So just to illustrate that we feel like each township's kind of in the ballpark in terms of a fair share to contribute to that. So that's our presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
If I might, it's interesting, Grant, to hear the presentation because it's almost as if from where we're seated, we're looking in the mirror. Expenditures having difficult time keeping up with revenues. Having to look to your savings, to your fund equity, to fund a budget deficit. Capital needs, which are so important, not able to keep up, particularly in this environment. We're looking at the very same kind of challenges on this year's budget and into the future. I do look at the fire service as essential service. Some might call it critical. I'm just saying it's essential versus necessary versus wants. And a strong community doesn't neglect these kind of services. It's clear. And a forward-thinking community does not neglect these kind of services when you're presenting us in a transparent way what your challenges are. I'm supportive of your budget request for this year. It's causing strain with us in our conversations because we started with, we're currently still in our draft preliminary budget for our general fund, our operating fund. We're looking at a $740,000 deficit. And the reality is that without deteriorating services or causing destabilization of the organizational structure, it has to be addressed. And those are tough things because unlike the township, municipal government, where we're able to impose taxes or increase taxes and revenue, you are looking at, you cannot do that. No different than we can't print money the way the feds can. So it's a challenge that we're cognizant of. And we've also heard it from Good Fellowship Ambulance, from Kimberly and Chaz. So we know what's going on there and has been going on. There's also the additional component that folks may or may not be aware of. And what Ben Franklin originally set up has been terrific over a couple hundred years, but over the last 20 years, volunteerism in fire service has dramatically declined for a number of societal reasons. I think it's a famed fire company that had the recent, in the last 4 or 5 years, the update to their station down at the university, where one of the provisions they accommodated was housing, places for the firefighters to sleep in. And that's been, as I understand it, pretty successful when I talk to people like Bill Ronayne. So that's another component of trying to keep your facilities up to date. And I can appreciate not catching up with your capital contribution. I'm taking it to heart. I think it's an essential service. And I think it's part of a strong community. It's part of the relationship that we need to have. Mutual aid is a wonderful thing amongst the other fire companies. I remember the ex-supervisor, late Supervisor Marty Shane, saying that sooner or later, the county is going to have some bigger involvement in emergency services, but you know what a difficult conversation that is to have to begin with, let alone to take action. So volunteerism in the fire service in Pennsylvania has substantially declined, as I indicated. And as a result, we have now how many career firefighters?
12 full-time, so essentially 16 FTEs. We have 12 full-time and 20 some part-timers.
Okay, so career fire service, professional fire fighters is increasing, and you probably have in your forecast somewhere down the line of increasing that number. Am I in error?
I want to say we're holding our own.
Right now with the
numbers we
volunteer?
have. Yeah.
Okay,
The addition, we added that ambulance during the daytime this year. The staffed ambulance.
right, so that, right,
And that was a
gotcha.
big step for us.
Yeah.
We
That's
think we're
right.
comfortable with this current staffing model for the foreseeable future.
Okay. All
May
right,
I ask
And
a
we still,
question?
we still have a relatively strong volunteer base. It's just, it's the EMS component of it that's really challenging for us.
I have a question for Dave. On page 6 of 11 of the latest that I have, under public safety, we have in the 2023 budget, we have $499,882, which is $91,000 more than 22 actual.
Yep.
First of all, is the 430 that Grant's talking about, is that in the 499?
Which page?
6 of 11.
Tonight's worksheet, it's not tonight's.
Is that not tonight's?
well, that wouldn't, I only got changed from
I
one
don't think it
version to
changed.
the other.
General fund.
The total contributions to what's referred to as volunteer fire, which includes, I think that includes good fellowship as well as Malvern, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it goes, so
Well, how does it break down?
2022 is $408,748. 2023 is $499,881. 432,000 of that is Goshen Fire, 35,000 is Good Fellowship, and 18,000 is Malvern. And then there's $15,000 worth of alarms.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight, Grant. It's very informative, helpful.
Hey, Grant, I have a comment and a question.
Yes.
I'd like to echo Mike's comments. My father and older brother were volunteer firemen, my dad for 50 years in Camp Hill. And I'm supportive of firefighting and everything that you guys do, ambulance services. My brother is an EMT trainer upstate New York. And I view it as an essential service for a community that's keeping up its services to its residents. But I have just one question. I noticed in the county ARPA that several emergency services groups got funding. So I was wondering, can you give us did you apply for grants?
No,
or-
we were not aware that that was open to fire companies. So I talked to Cody about it a little bit. He asked me about East Brandywine specifically. And they had been notified by their township that the request or the application process was open. So that's how they got the insight into that grant application.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Have you considered a capital fundraising? Is it, I know that you hire outside consultants and sometimes the consultants make more money than the fire department does and those kinds of things. but-
We had a capital campaign when we built the Boot Road station. And it was moderately successful. To your point, we probably paid, I won't say we paid as much in expenses, but a significant part of that was expense. But we made some decent money at that. Our plan is actually to apply for a RACP grant through the state. I think Coatesville just got one. Broomall got one. There's been a number of fire department construction projects that have been funded by a RACP grant, provided you have the matching funds. So that's really what our plan is going to be, but you have to match it. So we have to build up our capital reserves to a point where we have an adequate match.
Thank you.
Hey, Grant, we had a really good conversation. I appreciate you coming in. It might help people to understand a lot of the majority of the calls that you get, which aren't technically fire calls and aren't technically EMS emergency calls, even though they seem like they are.
Yeah, so just to give you a quick overview, we're probably run about 600 fire calls this year. But we will also hit about 4,400 EMS calls, which is up about 500 from last year. But a lot of those calls are, as we all know, they're not true emergencies. A lot of them are lift assist, things like that, but it's still things we're obligated to respond to and provide that service. And it's the community we live in. Our largest sort of neighborhood that we go to obviously is Hershey's Mill, closely followed by Wellington, Bellingham, and the Arbors, and all of the others. It's majority of our patients are 65 and older, but it's the community we're in, and it's the service we provide. So,
And the fire calls, the 600 that you mentioned, those are with actual equipment and personnel dispatched.
yes.
So they're at risk as soon as they get, as they're boarding the equipment, let alone in transit and then getting there and depending on what they find.
Now, as I report every month, about 48 to 50% of those are automatic alarms, but it, again,
Still have to
requires a
respond.
response.
You have to respond. That's what we expect in a community like this.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Grant? Anybody in the audience or in the Zoom room?
Madam
Grant?
Chair, there is
Yeah.
a chat comment. So essentially, it's resident Brian Novak,
Great, thank you, Brian.
and supportive of raising taxes was the context. So based on this conversation.
Okay,
Thank you, Brian.
thank you, Brian.
Grant, thank you.
Thank you for coming in,
Informative and
and
thanks for sharing.
we really do appreciate it.
At least-
We know how to get a hold of you if we have any other questions. Thank you so much. Thanks for.
Well, I was gonna say, just push the panic alarm. They'll be there.
Please. All right, so moving along under the same vein, Dave, do you want to take things from here?
So we've been talking about the preliminary general fund budget and the other funds, but tonight we're focusing on the general fund. Looking at closing this $740,000 gap, and we've got options for rosier revenue projections. There are some sustainable probably revenue projections that we could increase. And then there's just what expenses can be cut, what is acceptable to cut, and what's realistically, if we do cut it, what are our costs actually going to be? The tough part that we run into is if we don't cut a service in particular, say we don't decide we are not going to pay this year, in which case we know that we're not going to be paying for the materials, we're not going to be paying for the labor, the rentals and all of that, then we could quantify that. But if we just assume that it's going to be less expensive than project, and Mark and I get with both of these, and he bets on every single vendor that he uses, multiple vendors and co-stars, and prices everything out. The real question is, why would it come in lower? So I can change numbers, but when the invoices come, we have to pay for whatever costs we purchased.
Correct. Right.
So the difficulty there is, we can cut a little bit here and a little bit there and get to the number, but I wanted to show two kind of different approaches, because we've been leaning in all of our discussions, there's either we could probably borrow from the general fund budget. It looks like we're probably going to be $200,000 at least in the negative. Just the public safety budget alone, with VIDO and tuition fire needs and EMS services. That's it's a very large increase. It's over $600,000 of our total increase. So when we look at how we're going to close that gap, it's really, we could use a tax revenue increase, or a real estate millage increase, or we could use our general fund existing balance. Or we could use a combination of those with some expense cutting, and then also assume that revenues come in even higher than you would assume normally. So this first cut is assuming that there was a 0.5 mil tax increase in 2023. So you can see the revenue from 11.4 million
Dave, do you mind putting your mic on? Sorry.
Yep.
Thanks. So you could see in 2023 versus 2022, with a 0.5 tax millage increase in real estate, it would go up about $800,000, 12.3 versus 11.4 million. Included in this would also be $100,000 of an increased EIT projection, which basically would show us about flat with 2021. It would increase interest income $75,000 based on my current rates that we have, and also assuming that we get some more bumps up by the Fed, which is predicted. Sewer recharge revenue, because of the work that we're going to be doing at the sewer, we will have additional administrative and public works recharges going through that. Building permit projections. This year was the highest that we've seen yet. It's over $300,000 year to date, including October. We've never seen that before. And even though we've increased some fees, it's just the amount of work that people are doing in this market right now. So that with some state pension aid would increase our revenue. And then we really would be fully funding our expenses as they were originally laid out, including the WeGo, without using trust dollars to pay for it. It might give us a little bit of a breathing room on the capital reserve budget, about $78,000. I included our most recent healthcare cost increase, which is about $33,000. It's up 12%. In this cut, I increased the Milltown budget for the Pocket Park, another $15,000, which would give us about $25,000. We don't know yet what that project would be or how it would shake out as far as what residents want and what we could build in-house and get done for them there. There seems to be interest in that. A slight increase to the ESAC budget, which they requested. $2,000 EIT commissions would go up, and this would cover those as well because of the additional revenue we're expecting. We would reduce the ABC appreciation event by 5,000 and postpone the printed newsletter for a year. We would look to offset that in the future and starting it in 2024 by getting advertisers to fund it. That would get us there. I've included also on the side there how much 0.5 millage increase is for a variety of these, just to give some examples of some of the average values and what that impact would look like for some of these neighborhoods. Summit House increased $37.50 a year. Williams Way increase about $100 a year. Hershey's Mill could be between $50 and $100 per year, and Bow Tree higher, 137. Clock Tower around 187, which is one of the higher ends. We have other options. Other option that was discussed is, well, on this same option, this is what the long term, when I drop in the real estate tax increase, even out past 2024, we'll still run into projected deficits, and this is only assuming a 2% inflation rate. A lot of the analysts are assuming that we are going to come back down. We're hopeful of that. It's also assuming about 3.5% for EMT and WeGo police services increase year over year. So even with the tax increase millage, we'll get out to 2028, 2029 before we start hitting any severe impact to our ending fund balance. So we're still over $4 million in 2028. And that holds true with our financial policies, funding over 20 to 25% of our annual revenue. Any questions on that scenario?
No.
So another option is with no tax increase next year. And you can see about a $355,000 deficit which would be, we would use existing general fund balances if that were to come true. Um, Revenues remaining fairly flat. You can flip to the next one, but you can see the net result growing year after year without any sort of an increase. This current gap, one of the proposals would be to close it with slightly higher, about $75,000 higher in revenue anticipation. So 50,000 from EIT, which would be about a 1% increase over the highest EIT that we've seen in the past 10 years. We would be assuming another $25,000 in building permit projections, again, like 17% higher than what we've seen as our highest yet. And then all the other same revenue increases that we feel pretty comfortable with. We would use about $300,000 or more like $350,000 for general fund balance to close the gap. This would also increase, reducing a combination of fire and EMS services by about $50,000, assuming that we had $35,000 in additional police savings or some kind of a grant savings. Reduce our ABC celebration by $10,000, have one quarterly newsletter versus 4, reduce roadside littering to 1 event, and reduce the Malvern Library, which currently I have at 30,000. They requested 25, and this would drop it back down to that 25 level. And also the $3,000 offset the EIT commissions that would increase because of the $150,000. So that's a second case. And you can look at the long
Dave,
term.
let me stop you a second.
Sure.
I probably am not adding it up right. These past, that page, and the prior page, on this, page 6, you show a current gap of $741,000, 600. On the prior page, you show in red $355,000, 840. What's the difference? Why don't those numbers square out? Just explain.
Instead of using a fund balance as a transfer, that's just going to wait until the end of the year. And if there's that 355 outstanding, that number that says use existing general fund balance of 300 would be 355. That number doesn't actually show in page 5. It's just assumed by what that negative net result is.
So to balance it, you use the what? The interfund operating transfer?
I would use the existing fund balance.
Well, I mean, on page 5, to balance the 23, the 23 budget, regardless of the 355, we're still short more money. Where are we putting that in from?
What do you mean, the 355, John?
It replaces the fund balance transfer.
Yeah. And the total revenues for 2023 budget, 11,569,000, blah, 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 plus the 355 then gives us the 11,925, right?
Correct.
Okay, what is on the revenues and where do we get this interfund operating transfer? The last line of revenues. Series.
Those are recharges from the refuse fund, the sewer sewer operating fund, and the municipal authority.
So on page 5, the 2023 revenues are $355,000 short of the 2023 expenses, right?
Correct.
Well, where does the $741,000 come in?
This would be $741,000, except we added into these revenues of 11,569. We added $330,000, which is the 150 for EIT, 75 for interest income, 50 for building permits, 40 for sewer recharge, 15 additional state pension aid. So that's 330. Now the additional 350 that's missing, this is 300, but I found out our most recent insurance costs right before. So this would actually be 356. So the 330 is included in the revenue. The 350 is not.
I got you.
So the difference is the revenue on those, for those
Yeah,
pages.
and all right, and that's an option still, right?
Yes.
Okay, I thank you.
So the biggest difference between these approaches is really the long term. Short term, we can get through 2023. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. Obviously, the trends are saying that we are definitely going to be out of pocket. Now, whether that's closed with tax revenue or if it's closed with fund balance is up to the board. But you can see the long-term impact of not having a tax increase plus with the deficit on the fund balance if it were to continue. So you go from about 5.7 million projected this year to 5.34, 5.4 next year, then 4.7, 3.9, and then 26, 27, we're out already past our finance policies obligations.
Yep.
I think from doing this, some of the things that stick out is it may not seem like a lot of dollars, the extra 50,000 in EIT projection, but 1% over what we've ever seen may be a stretch. Another $25,000 in permit revenue could be a stretch. That would just be another 75 on top of that 355, which would be about $400,000 of fund balance, but it's absorbable with our current fund balance. And neither one of these scenarios is really assuming that we pay extra into the capital reserve to pay for Milltown Dam Park rehabilitation. And we've got a $2 million plus nut before we get our bids in. And we're hoping that it comes out at that. But
Dave, I'll make a general comment that you used the term, you could take a rosier outlook and change the numbers to make it work. As I look at some of those are arbitrary. I mean, like you said, we're putting on rose-colored glasses and just saying, I'll plug a number after we've used what I consider to be reasonable assumptions. And then we're just saying, well, these are the reasonable assumptions. However, we can plug a number, make it work. And I'm not in favor of doing that. I'm in favor of using reasonable assumptions based on past history. So
yeah, and you never want to have to present to a board that you're going to be closing a gap of $700,000+. But I felt it important from the get-go and spoke with Derek about letting the board see the total out of pocket that we were and come up with some ideas and considerations that we could use, both revenue driven and expense driven, that seemed most appropriate and most practical and likely. And then, leave it to the board to see what we would actually want to do.
Well, on the other hand, the 2022 budget revenues were projected to be 8,408,000, and the actual our projected actual is 8,722,000. That's on page 1 of the general fund worksheet. So essentially, the 2022 budget was about over $300,000 short in projecting revenues. We actually collected $300,000 more in revenues, if I'm reading this correctly.
Yep.
So I don't know if we have a rosy projection, or I don't know if we have a, pardon me for this, Dave, an accountant's careful projection, which may not be high enough.
but on the other hand,
That's fair.
my grandfather always said he was looking for a one-armed lawyer because he could only say on one hand.
Yep, on one hand, and there's the other.
On the other hand,
I did want to make a quick comment about
Well, let
process
me,
here. Okay, sorry.
Just make a quick comment. We had a kind of a banner year in transfer taxes because of the real estate market. And so a lot of that income comes as a kind of a one-off, I
One
think.
time. Well, now
That
you
we may
say
not
that.
see with this, now that interest rates are at 7% and the market is cooling on the residential side. We might have a big commercial sale, but those are budget items that are kind of below the revenue line, if you will, because they're so difficult to predict.
Well, sure, sure. But on the other hand, we have third hand. We have the projected development at Miller Farm, which could be 15 houses at about $1 million a house.
2 years from now.
Well, maybe 2 years,
that's it.
maybe they'll go faster.
And that's additional annual revenue between current property tax and earned income tax. If you use some basic assumptions, starting with $1 million property and assuming what the household income is, you're probably looking at a revenue enhancement from that development of probably at the max between those two sources, maybe $30,000 a year.
In what?
In earned income tax and property tax.
Property tax?
I mean, a $1 million property is going to be assessed at probably $350,000 presently, something like that.
Mhm.
And so 350,000 translates to a current property tax of about probably maybe approaching $450 per household. And if you look at a household income on a property like that, of say $250,000 a year, that's $2,500 split between the school district and the township at $1,250 each. You're looking at about $1,600, $1,800 of that revenue from each household coming into the township coffers as an ongoing stream. You multiply that by 13, 15, I think you come pretty close to what I just said at the start, probably maybe 30,000 enhanced revenue.
And there's no property transfer tax on that?
Well, that's a one-timer. So you'll get a transfer tax. But that'll be nice to get, but those homes will probably sell over the course of 2 years. I would think they would be out of here in 2 years, and depending on the market. So you would get a bump in real estate transfer from those new houses, say 6 a year, 7 a year, we could estimate. And you might get a total of $15,000, $16,000 each of those 2 years, something in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, it's 0.5%.
It's a one-timer.
All right. The other question I have is, do we have a final budget from the police department yet?
We just got it at the end of the day today. We have multiple scenarios, of course.
Well,
Depending on grants.
Are we allowed to say that?
We can't assume that we're gonna get grants.
Well, yeah, John,
Yeah.
I'm with you.
We can't.
So how bad is it? Generally,
Well, in this presentation, Dave, you mentioned here under expense updates, $175,000 additional general fund for the WeGo budget. Was that,
That's really comparing the one version, which is assuming that we take it out of our police trust versus not take it out of police trust.
which is not a good idea, given the current market. All right, but go ahead. So
Right.
you don't know that 175 is where we're gonna land with, once you get to analyze the actual budget?
No, it looks like if you go apples to apples, so I have 4.461 million in for the current look, even with the tax increases for the WeGo budget. We could, it looks like it may be down about $90,000 for our contribution in the cut that Kathy gave us. So that could be $90,000 good,
Okay, so 90,000 off of, say, 175?
not considering any sort of grants that the police might get.
And yeah, I don't
and
think.
God
grants
bless
are
us, I hope they get the grants, but you can't count on them.
No, I'd never include any grant money if it hasn't already been awarded.
You're
in
a
any of
careful
this.
accountant.
Yes.
Grants come below the transfer tax line.
Yeah. In the fantasy line. Okay, I suggest that we can't really do too much until we get the police budget numbers
Well,
in here.
really quickly, I want to talk about process right now because
Absolutely.
this is the fifth time we're talking about it in public as of now. We have November 15th is scheduled to be the preliminary passage of the budget, which essentially authorizes the advertisement in the paper of the budget. It has to sit for 20 days. It'll sit longer for that if we're on schedule because we do not meet again in December for the second meeting in December till December 20th. So we'll have plenty of time to advertise it if we stay on schedule. You can make changes from preliminary to final, 10% difference overall, and 25% to up to 25% in any one line item. If it goes past that, you need to re-advertise again for 20 days. We're scheduled to do it in November 15th.
And the
As long
process
as we
is a
have 20
20-day
days,
process.
as long as we have 20 days, Michelle, before we would
Right.
take action on.
So it's a
final.
20-day process.
Correct. So I guess, I mean, depending on what you want to discuss tonight, as far as, I guess my point is we need to solidify positions by specific board members sooner rather than later, whether that is tonight or calling up Dave in the next week and a half to get those positions as far as what you're in favor of on the expenses and revenues, but advertisement is now upon us, so we need to start thinking about that, unless we want to do, something else as far as the timeline, but
Well,
I'll leave that up
if
to
the
the
board
board.
wanted to have a specific work session on this and get further into the details of the budget, I'm amenable to that. I have a current position and I'm not gonna read everything I prepared, Madam Chair, but I just want to let you know where I am at the moment. Just want to also let you know that we do take this seriously. During this past week or two, I've continued to review this information and with conversations with fellow supervisors and including a 3.5-hour meeting yesterday with John Herzog, fellow supervisor, where we had Mark Miller coming in, our Public Works Director, to give us input. And the whole matter about trying to close the gap. And Dave, that was a very good presentation, a further extension of the work you've done. With this focus on these options to consider, I had written here that I'm comfortable with some of the revisions to the draft preliminary general fund that at the time included $100,000 to $150,000 increased to EIT, increased interest revenue above what's already been increased from 90,000, another $75,000 for next year based on the market. An increase in building revenue from either 25 or 50,000. Pension state aid is pretty clear. I looked at the PA Auditor General's report today on that. So that's an easy one, but that's $15,000. The sewer recharge, that makes sense, $40,000. I can buy into those two latter ones, but these other ones, it's interesting, your comment, David and Dave, my acceptance of those revenue revisions to our current draft would be concurrence with the Director of Finance that such revisions are not contrived expenditure reductions, and that the revenue increases are based upon reasonable expectations to realize. And I didn't hear that tonight. So I'm not comfortable with the EIT trying to seek a record increase during this next year. The additional interest income, if that's the forecast and you're comfortable with it, and we go from where we were this year to $90,000 next year initially, but now adding another 75 to it in interest and portfolio performance, I can go with that if you're comfortable with it. And same with the others, but I didn't hear it with building permit. I didn't hear it with EIT. Now, I would also said that I'd be willing with those considerations to authorize for at least for my vote, the use of fund balance against my, and I'm not supportive of this measure, but I could agree to it not to exceed $250,000 to close the budget gap. I've got some other comments here, but I'm going to cut pretty much to it. The current version one of the versions we saw includes this $500,000 property tax increase. Which with the net discount, 2%, et cetera, looks like it's close to about a $770,000 revenue enhancement under property tax receipts. It's what is shown with the $500,000 tax increase is a balanced budget. It erases the $741,000 budget deficit, and it avoids, to me, some questionable cuts to expenditures, which we can talk about in more detail if as we would like to, perhaps. I guess my position at this point in time with the revised 11/1/22 10-year projection, the illustration there estimates a budget surplus using a $500,000 property tax increase, a budget surplus in 2023, in 2024, a surplus of $177,000 under the current projection. That's great. We increase the millage. It takes care of the current year deficit, and we come out with a current projected surplus in 24. But that is followed by, and we've seen it, a budget trend of annual budget deficits beginning in 2025 of $67,000, not a big deal in all things considered, but increasing annually to over $2 million in 2033. So therefrom, it's reasonable to expect and plan for future property tax millage increases during the remainder of the current decade. Under this scenario, and giving credibility to the Director of Finance, why putting off a millage increase with what we see in front of us does not seem like well-managed fiduciary financial care. And so I will continue to support, based upon tonight's presentation and the review, as I mentioned, over the last couple of weeks and with fellow supervisors, I'm going to continue to support a $500,000 property tax increase this year to start to get us on a track of where I think this township needs to be to sustain, not erode, and to look to the future. And I think we all have to keep our eyes on the horizon.
Thanks, Mike. I just have a few comments. I have not solidified my position yet on where I stand. Currently, I am leaning towards a $500,000 increase for a couple of reasons. One being 60% of our increase in expenses is due to emergency services funding. This equates to $125 average to a household in East Goshen at $2.40 a week. While we've had record EIT the last 2 years, that does not make up the $2 million deficit in projection we have for the Milltown Dam. We made a promise to those residents and we need to make sure we fulfill it. One comment I have here is no one will come in here and ever support taxes, but people will come in here if their services decrease across the township. I want to make sure our services are fully funded. In regards to option number 2, I appreciate Dave putting this together. I do think that the increase in building permit projections as well as the EIT is, I think we're just putting some numbers in there to close the gap. I don't feel confident on that. I also don't feel confident using the police trust fund where we've already had a 20 to 20% decrease this year in funding. And then the options for expense decrease, like we've said tonight, that we can't count on grant money for additional police savings. This $500,000 increase would save us for 7 years to ensure that we have a well-funded township. That's where I'm at right now. I have not fully committed to $500,000, but that is where I'm leaning to ensure that our services are fully funded.
Yeah, I'm resistant to a tax increase. Very resistant in a year when inflation is hurting people. Not everybody in the township is well-to-do. And this will hurt some people. I won't say I won't ever vote for a tax increase because it may be necessary, but it's not absolutely necessary right now, especially if the police budget comes in showing plus $90,000 for us. That takes it down to Mike's $250,000, give or take, to be taken out of the reserve. And we have the reserve money. $250,000 won't break the reserve, and it will keep taxes where they are right now. I am concerned that we may be in or entering a recession, and I think it's the wrong time to raise taxes. We can afford to take $250,000 out of the reserve and balance the budget that way without raising taxes. And that doesn't mean I won't ever raise taxes. I won't make that promise. But right now, I think people are hurting, and I can't support a tax increase. So I would like to see option 2. The option that, and by the way, Dave, I also appreciate your presentation. You worked, I've seen these things done in business, and this takes a lot of time and a lot of work.
Thanks.
I like option 2, especially if we can get it down under $300,000 to come out of the reserve. That way we wouldn't have to raise taxes this year. And that's all I would promise, because who knows what next year is going to bring. Thank you.
David, do you have any comments this evening?
Yes, thank you. I've made my position pretty clear in the last meeting, and just to reiterate what I'm looking at, and I've talked it, we put the sustainability fund together. What I'm looking at is continuing deterioration of our 50, 60-year-old infrastructure. I'm looking at trees that need to come down in the township. I'm looking at 6 ponds that are owned by the township that need remediation. That study was done 4 years ago. The reason we haven't remediated some of those ponds is that we just decided not to fund it. I'm looking at an incomplete trail that right now creates an unsafe condition for trail users having to leave the trail onto Paoli Pike. The alternate trail, there's no funding in here to complete what I feel is an essential infrastructure for the township. Looking down the barrel of these expenses, I favor the 0.5 mil increase. Throwing a grenade in the middle of all of this, township might consider an emergency municipal services tax. Fire and police are 42% of our budget and a growing expense. We're looking at reduced volunteerism, increased pay to the fire. They need money every year. They need infrastructure improvement. The police budget isn't probably going down in the near future. One way to recognize the impact of that on our budget is to promulgate a new tax, which is permitted under the state law. I won't bring that up this year. I'm just putting that out right now.
I'm glad you didn't bring it up. Thank you.
Just want to get it on the record.
Since you didn't bring it up.
I mean, for consideration this year, but I brought it up.
Right. I'm going to also just reiterate what I had stated at the last meeting, and that's I am not in favor of a tax increase this year. I think that it's I think that it's just a terrible time for us to do it this year when so many of our residents are struggling, and not everybody in our township is as wealthy and can afford the increase. It sounds so minimal when Cody says it's only $240 a week, but there are people who are living paycheck to paycheck and having a difficult time with that. Oftentimes working a job or a job and a half. And so I'm reluctant to be amenable to raising taxes this year. I think that it's an unfortunate reality that we do have to look at raising taxes potentially as early as next year. And that's something that I think that we should look at next year. I don't think that that's something that we should be discussing until that time. We have a short budget shortfall. It's a small budget shortfall. If we look at the option two and consider that there could be an option of seeing a little bit less of a contribution to WeGo. So at this time, I'm not in favor. I want people to be aware also that the next part of the budget process is to pass the budget to the public. This does not mean that we are in favor or not in favor of the budget. So at the November 15th meeting, between now and then, I'd ask each board member to be in touch with Dave and offer more suggestions. Maybe there are some line items we could reconsider for a little bit less funding to help close the shortfall. But when we vote in November, on November 15th, to pass the budget to the public, that does not mean that it's a yes vote necessarily. At this time, it just means we are required by law to pass it to you so that you can review it and comment on it and give us your input. So I think that we can close this budget discussion and move on. Is everybody amenable to moving on?
Yeah, I just want to make one comment on the process and the preliminary budget and the advertisement, public notice for public comment for the 20-day period. When we take that action, presumably later on in this month, to advertise the budget under the second-class township code, we do have limitations on adjustments to that preliminary budget before it hits final and the expected approval during December. We are on a calendar year basis for our fiscal calendar. And under those second-class township restrictions, we cannot increase between the preliminary and the final. We cannot increase the budget by more than 10% overall, nor can we increase it more than 25% on any given line item. And so similar to land development, once the preliminary plan approval is granted, that vests the property and pretty much of the rights, and there's usually very little changes that occur between preliminary and final. And that is what I would expect in this process, as it usually occurs in municipal government. And that my expectation is that we will be voting on a budget that either is going to reflect some revenue enhancement or we're not. Otherwise, we will not have the ability to at least effectively advertise the budget. So I think we do have to come to a pretty clear decision for the staff to know where we are by the time we get to that point in the process for advertisement. Thanks.
Russ Frank does.
Okay, are there any questions in the room here? And there are questions on our Zoom room. So is that Russ there? Russ Frank? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Okay. Two things I'd like to comment on after hearing about this for probably the third or fourth time. Why are we pushing this down so quickly that we have to why can't we let this go into January? I mean, the federal government does it every year. Why are we so tight in having to push this thing done and get it done in a short period of time?
We're required by law.
Because Russ, this is a requirement by the Pennsylvania State Code for second-class township.
Okay,
We have to have a budget in place, and if we don't, we're in violation of that.
okay. I wasn't sure.
And that's why we started the process so early too.
Yeah. The last thing I'd like to comment on is the last time we talked about this, and this time we talked about that there was two people on the board that actually took concern about the southern end of our townships, peoples and their income and strapping availability of excess funds. It's the first time I ever heard it in any of these meetings. And I'd like to thank you guys that made those comments, because I think it is very meaningful, brings a lot of things home to me that people are starting to think about. People live in the condos or the township apartments, that really strapped for cash when it comes to taxes. I witnessed this when I did the census back in 2020. A lot of the township people that were not as good as off as you guys on the board or myself. And I just want to thank the two people for continuing to think about that. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Russ.
Russ, I'd like to respond to that as well. The other three people on the board are not ignorant of those circumstances. They can occur anywhere in the township. Apartments, of course, you'll say, well, that's going to be passed on to the renters. Apartments do not pay property tax. Yes, it will be passed on, but no different than anything else in our lives. Verizon bills, water bills, Pico, Aqua, with very little input from anybody to change what they've decided to do to increase their rates or their service charges. We have a county with a I believe it's a 4.6 millage property tax that provides fine services. They're a good operation of fine local government, but I don't think that the services they provide touch most of us in East Goshen the way the services that are provided here touch us. Same with the school district. There are many people that have not even used the school district over the years. Certainly, there are many people in places like Bellingham, the villages of Hershey's Mill, who don't have any relationship to the school district except paying 22 mills of property tax. That has increased 0.71 mills over the last I think it's since 2020 to 2022, the school district taxes have increased 0.71 mills. I haven't heard a lot of protests from people about that they end up paying. Now, you also have to look, yes, there are people that are paying things hand to hand, paycheck to paycheck, but we're in a community. And if there is an increase in a property tax for some assessed valuations that might amount half a mil amounting to $37, or in some cases $50 or $100, I don't want to discount anyone's hardship. And in fact, I asked our solicitor whether or not the municipality had the authority to consider hardship in applying the property tax. We do not have the authority to do that. It has to be applied uniformly, which is unfortunate, but that is, there are reasons for it, and I understand it. So we're not insensitive. The other three are not insensitive to it, but there are also decisions that need to be made, and there are figures in front of us that appear reasonable to us with where we're looking in the future and where we are. There's always going to be a year where there is hardship. Next year, there's going to be 2 new supervisors running for office. And there'll be some tumult with that as well. So when is the right time? The right time is when the facts point very effectively at where we stand and where we're headed. And I think the facts are pretty compelling with what I believe are reasonable projections by a very competent financial professional. And I can't ignore them any longer and wait and see deterioration, understanding that some people may have a little more difficulty and may have to reorient their budget to pay $35 or $50 or $75 or $100. Thanks.
Okay, so before we move on, I'm just going to comment that Verizon is a for-profit organization. We are a nonprofit organization, provide services to our community, and it's our responsibility, our fiduciary responsibility, to make sure that we're doing the best we can with the funds we have, without the option of raising taxes first. And people have the option of leaving Verizon, and they have the option of leaving other carriers. So we'll leave it at that. I don't want to hear Verizon and Comcast brought up in the same context because it's completely unacceptable. These people are seeing people leave their services as well because of their price increases.
I'll repeat a comment I made last meeting, is that this fixed income argument and the impacts of inflation ignore the fact that the township's on fixed income and we're feeling the impact of inflation. So, which is driving this budget discussion, and to ignore that is unacceptable as well.
And we
but-
haven't had a salary increase in the township in 20 years.
Well, all the workers of the township have had an increase.
There you go.
And many people are cutting back. We're not cutting back, we're adding to the budget.
What would you like to cut back, John? We've gone through the
Oh my
expenditure.
God.
We spent 3.5 hours yesterday going
Well-
through it.
Yeah, you
And-
know what I want to cut back, it's on the page.
Well, let's give an example. Here's one thing we talked about yesterday, John and I. We looked at the Parks and Recreation budget. It's gonna take a couple minutes. The current budget estimated for next year is, I think, around $364,000 for our Parks and Recreation programs and staffing and budget. Of that $364,000, there is a revenue net that is received for participants who pay fees for the various services provided through Parks and Recreation, yoga classes, camps, et cetera. There's a long list of them in the amount of over $200,000. I said to John, we could make that department and that part of the budget, that tranche of the budget, we could make that expenditure neutral by raising the fees on participants to cover the additional $130,000, $140,000 that is not paid for, that essentially involves the two staff members. We could make that a fully balanced budget by raising the fees. I said, one of the things that we might affect, though, are people who can't necessarily afford to go to ACAC, like I do. They may not be able to afford that. Maybe not even the YMCA, but they may be able to afford some programs here that we provide. So you increase the fees on that, that could be a hardship, or they may not be able to participate anymore. I think it's part of community. Everybody doesn't partake of all the services that are used in a municipality in our case. But there are the essential ones, and there are others that provide for lifestyle and quality communities. And that's what we have here. Could we restrict and start to put up toll booth for our community day and not allow people from outside of East Goshen Township to attend? I guess we could do those things too, but that's not community. So that's one area of expenditure we did talk about. And it's one that we certainly could increase the fees. There may be an offset to that, and people may not participate at all at that point. So it is a two-edged sword, and it's a fine balance, and it's not perfect. So that's one example of expenditures. We talked about our ABC reception, where we recognize our volunteers on our advisory boards and commissions. They provide a lot of service, a lot of valued service that could translate into consultant dollars if we didn't have them. What the number is amongst them, I can't say exactly, but it's not a small number. So we talked about cutting the cost of that. It was, I think it was listed at $12,000, cutting that back either completely or back to several $1,000s. I'd be receptive to that. That we could change the format. We can create a gathering with bring your own, and we can have it at the park during warm weather. We could do something like that, but they deserve recognition. We talked about the newsletter. I still believe a couple copies of the printed newsletter are of value. People read it. The website's terrific, but it's not the tactile appreciation that many people still have, especially in many of our senior communities. They appreciate a newsletter. So those are examples of some expenditures we've looked at. I can't find a lot of fluff or waste in our budget. Believe me, with a director of finance as a professional and our manager as a professional, if there's fluff there and we're not aware of it, they're going to be called on the carpet. I don't see it. I don't see it.
Mike, yesterday when you and I met, we did not talk about cutting the park.
No, we didn't. No,
that's-
John, we did not. We
That's
did
not
not.
one of the things on this sheet of paper where we did agree we could cut some $300,000. And it can be done. There's always fluff in budgets. I just want to be clear that I did not talk about cutting the park. We
No,
didn't put
agree.
that on our
I agree.
paper.
100% I agree. We did
Um,
not.
Otherwise, I think we've beaten the dead horse enough.
Enough. Yep.
Maybe we ought to get on to some other subject.
Yep.
Well, we might have, but I don't think it's a dead horse and I don't think it's beating. I think it is a fiduciary responsibility and our due diligence to have extended and detailed conversations about a lot of money, impact on residents, and relationship to both taxes and services. So I don't think it's beating a dead horse.
Okay. We're going to move along though, because we do have the rest of the agenda to deal with. And if we need to have further discussion, then perhaps we need to consider another meeting. Russ, do you have anything else? Okay, Russ, you're not muted, just so you know. Do you have anything else?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, no worries.
Phillies up 2-0.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, that was helpful.
Appreciate that. All right, and moving along, we are accepting the resignation of Phil Mayer from the Municipal Authority. Derek, do you want to give us a little rundown on his service to our community, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. After 7 years of service to the East Goshen Municipal Authority, Phil Mayer is moving from the township. So effective yesterday, Halloween, he is resigning from the municipal authority. So we will, as we are with every ABC, looking for new members. The only, they're all important, but this one is important to get one on as quickly as possible because the municipal authority does play a vital role in some of the more expensive infrastructure in the township. So I will be really scouring the township, trying to find who I can in order to have them come forth for an interview for the board, because as the board is aware, we did keep the interview process in place for three. There's planning commission, municipal authority, and zoning hearing board.
I think the ESAC too, because they're now different
Okay,
than they had been. So I think that
okay.
I mean, I might be mistaken about that, but
No, I
that's
agree,
okay.
Michelle.
Okay.
That's good.
Well, either way, this is an ABC that we
Yep.
will be interviewing for. So I
Absolutely.
will be, we're under no time constraint because it was not an elected
Right.
official, but again, sooner rather than
It's
later for
important.
sure.
Okay,
May I make a comment on that? I also believe, since the municipal authority is a, if you will, depending on how you look at it, autonomous or semi-autonomous entity, inextricable in our case with the municipal government. They have the autonomy to authorize funds, raise funds if they need to. And it is an important position, appointment. And I would like to have the municipal authority members be able to interview the candidates and offer a recommendation to the board for that appointment.
yeah, to make sure that they are a good fit.
That is up to the board.
Perhaps we could consider reviewing the resumes and then allowing them to do that. That's actually an interesting idea, Mike.
Okay.
I can
Um,
email the board.
Do
and
we
follow
have
up
to,
on that.
I was gonna say, can we have a little direction from you and Bill on that?
Uh,
If need
I don't,
be?
I don't think that's an
Okay,
issue.
good.
I would just like you to make a motion to accept the resignation of Phil Mayer from municipal authority. But other than that,
Okay.
I can follow up with everything else.
All right,
So move.
okay.
Second.
And anybody have any comment regarding this in the audience or in the Zoom room? And I just want to say thank you very much to Phil for his
Yeah.
7 years of
Yeah.
dedication.
Yep.
And I'm gonna call the vote.
Thank you, Phil.
Those in favor of accepting the resignation?
Aye.
Sorry to see you go.
Yep, me too.
Thank you, Phil.
Me too.
Okay, next up is the distinguishing of a sewer easement on Line Road.
Bill, I'm gonna let you take this one. You
Thanks,
for
Eric.
your money tonight.
Thank you. So on a subdivision plan that was recorded back in the 1980s for the Thorncroft property, there was a sanitary sewer easement that was granted to the township over a couple properties that ultimately The sanitary sewer improvements were never constructed there. But because they're on a record plan, they're impacting the property owner. If they want to do anything with their property, they have to show that easement and they have to work around it. So they've approached the township and asked them to extinguish the sewer easement. And so I've worked with their counsel to create this extinguishment and release of easement document that you see here. I have confirmed with the township manager and with your public works director that they don't have any need for this easement going forward. So I would recommend that you approve.
Yeah, Mark and I looked pretty in depth. It's kind of surrounded by conservation
Okay.
area and there's no possibility of any
Okay.
sewer going. in
Madam
there.
Chair, I'd move that we, David.
I'm sorry, just a question. Did we pay for the easement when it was initially granted or was it granted under subdivision?
No, it was just put on a plan.
Yeah, it was.
So it was not something that you purchased. It
Is
was,
there any way that you can reserve option on that easement? Or are you saying that you looked at it and there's just no future use? And
Mark was pretty comfortable that there was no future use and we kind of went over the map and where it lies and there's just.
And it's distinct for sewer only.
it
Correct.
specifically says sanitary.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, I would move that we authorize the chair to execute the proposed extinguishment and release of easement document for the property located at 214 Line Road.
Second the motion.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding this on the board, in the room, or in the Zoom room? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. Those in favor of extinguishing this easement, aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
And I guess I know why Brian's here tonight. Sorry it took so long to get to you. The ESAC would like to, they'd like to send a letter to some residents. Why don't you come on up, Brian, and tell us about the letter, and that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
Just a side note, spending 35 years almost in accounting, I want to congratulate everyone for what they have to do here tonight. It's a hard job to do this. And Dave, my hat's off to you. One day you'll be sitting on the other side looking up at something like this. So ESAC has done a draft letter. This idea of trying to solicit letters and introduce homeowners that have new roofs came out of a discussion with the Westchester Clean Energy Future. A little background, I'm the volunteer for Solarize Greater Westchester, and I've done about 35 to 40 different solar assessments for the 6 township surrounding area that covers the Westchester Council of Governments. What I found was the biggest issue with people who are interested in going solar is the fact that they had older roofs. So the idea here was that if we could get a list of homeowners who had new roofs, we could then just send them a letter alerting them that this is a good time to consider solar. And there's some references that they could connect to. East Goshen residents, some of the residents who were here at the Sustainability Expo in April have agreed to be references to talk to different people who might be interested in this. I think the letter references Solarize Greater Westchester. But I guess the idea here is to just get the information out to them, to sort of put the idea in the head, because what I'm finding is that, and as everyone here knows, changes occur slowly, and education is a very important aspect of that. So we'd like to have permission to, initially I thought, well, yeah, once we got permission, I just mailed them out, but apparently Derek is saying that, we have the list that came from code enforcement. I was very surprised because I was expecting a couple hundred and the list was over 900 homes. Fortunately, about 600 of them were with Hershey Mills because they're going through a lot of development on the refurbishing of their roofs. So it was about 300 homes. We whittled it down to about 89 homes. The process was to look up their address on Google Project Sunroof to determine a rating in terms of all of these homes. 89 of them have excellent solar radiance. When you look, put their address on the Google Project Sunroof map, their entire roof shows up as an entire bright yellow.
Oh,
So just for reference,
Yeah.
I have a solar system and my roof is a dull orange. And I
huh.
projected, I think this month, I'm going to celebrate and have my 7th month of a no electric bill, other than the customer charge.
That's fantastic.
So what we're trying to do is sort of go with the most, potentials for the township. So that's what we're.
Brian, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
I love that initiative. I would like to. I want to talk to you afterward.
Okay. That's the whole idea, is to get
You get a
engaged.
commission on it.
No, this is to get
Excellent.
engaged in a conversation. And
Yeah.
I think it's great.
And
We're talking about replacing our roof. It's getting there.
Yep.
And we have a south-southwest
Yep.
facing, at least the front elevation, which is, that's of some concern the way it is, but that's part of the transition that we all have to start to be.
Brian, I will first of all say that you can put me on the list for reference if anybody wants to contact me.
Thank you. We will.
Because we're, we can talk later, Mike.
I just raised my hand. I actually. didn't say
And I think that I would even like to go a step further and say, why wouldn't we send a letter to all the homeowners who are putting on new roofs, or even handing it to them with their permit for their consideration?
The
Tell them
only
to look
problem
into
with that is that, again, there were 300 residences that had new roofs in the last 5 years. Of those 300, 89 are excellent and about 22 are good.
Okay,
Some houses actually don't even show up with any solar radiance because of the
Okay.
tree coverage
Okay.
on some of their homes.
Coverage, yeah.
So, but
That's
again, this is an engagement, but
Mhm.
that we would want to engage them if they're interested in solar, to ask certain questions like, have you had an energy audit? It doesn't make sense to put a 10K system on a house that is very inefficient.
right.
If they have an older house, obviously older building code requirements were not up to par. Like certain, if you have a new house, definitely you are probably a good candidate.
What about what it costs for a 3-bedroom relatively new house?
Well, I will say what accountants like to say, the devil is in the details. And there are lots of variables in terms of what the cost might be. A lot of things that depend upon if you have if you have a flat roof, if you have a roof without any penetrations, if you have a roof with dormers or other kinds of windows that
Obstacles.
extrude from the roof.
You're sure you're an accountant and not a lawyer, right?
I'll make a comment, though, that two things. One is the letter refers people to sources of information
Yeah.
and not any commercial site. which
Correct,
is
correct.
important. The
Yeah.
second thing is that there are, I think, 3 rebates. The 30% is current, and then there's 2 additional under the Inflation Reduction Act, the additional potential based on need and a couple other factors in the future. So the cost could come down considerably if you qualify for some of these assistance. It's referred to in the letter.
I believe that those additional credits were written into the law, the Inflation Reduction Act, for the nonprofits and municipalities. I'm not sure whether the extra, well, and then maybe I could be wrong. I haven't spent a lot of time on that particular side of that.
Probably right.
Brian?
But you may be correct, David. I think that was written for all of the solar the solar credits associated with it.
Hey, Brian, since this is, I appreciate the information, and since this is a really informative only, is
Yeah.
this something, did you guys discuss whether this could be included in a new resident packet or something?
So, yes, and we would like the Westchester Clean Energy Future Committee to discuss the pros and cons of that. And then we would, if that were something that we would want to bring to the board, we would certainly want to consider that. I think there's pros and cons on both sides. One pro would be that every homeowner that gets a building permit for a new roof would get a letter like that and get the information. The con on that is that if the township takes it over, it may be just here's the information. If it doesn't lead to a link or to somebody, a resident, that they can fall back on and have an engaging conversation, then it may not be, I'm not sure. It's something that I think that there should be more discussion about that.
Okay. Brian, it's my understanding that not every roof replacement needs a building permit if it's simply shingles. Derek?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the scope of it, but I mean, if you're just replacing shingles, it's usually doesn't require a permit.
So if you're replacing shingles, that means that you are putting another layer of shingles on the roof.
Not sheathing, not wood or particle board sheathing.
Right.
But possibly I'm gonna say a Tyvek, not a Tyvek, but then the shingle. So maybe, but not structural, if you will, that starts to get down to the frame,
Right.
which can occur. But then my question is, if you didn't get a building permit to begin with for it, and the roofers are in typically in one day and they finish maybe 2 days if they do have to replace some sheathing. I'm wondering how many people actually get.
Brian, I'll
permits.
follow up via email. I'll copy Dwayne, our Director of Code Enforcement, and
Okay.
we'll get into some specifics in that and see if that's going to be an issue at all.
Good.
All
I think
right.
it's a great idea, though.
Madam
Is
Chair,
there a motion?
Madam Chair, I recommend we allow the USAC to send out the attached letter to the residents of the township identified as having an excellent roof for potential rooftop solar.
Thank you. Excellent. Are there any other questions here in the audience or in the
Thank you,
Zoom room? Brian, thank you very much. I'm going to call the question then. Those in favor of sending out the letter?
Aye.
Aye. And lastly, well, under new business at least, introduction to the conditional use application that will be heard on November 15th for the 1010 Hershey Mill Road property.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be relatively quick with this because we do have a conditional use hearing coming up on this. This is, I think we talked about it earlier tonight. We talked about it a few times in public, mentioning it. 1010 Hershey Mill Road, known as the Miller property. A developer has an agreement of sale on this property to come in and potentially put in 13 new single-family homes, but I think there's also existing structures that will be used as homes, which would bring it up to at least 15 homes.
Yeah, there's a
Total?
barn, there's a
Yeah.
barn and a house.
I don't know what they're doing with the barn though, so I have to clarify that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they are coming in under a conditional use hearing because the single-family open space development option, which is a conditional use under the R2 district, that is what they are attempting to use, and it's essentially using a large space, common space for to offset any of the impervious coming in. So that is why they're coming for conditional use. They already went to the planning commission for introduction in October. The planning commission will hear this again tomorrow night. I will be there and probably give a recommendation on that as well. A letter was set out to residents informing them of the planning commission meeting and the November 15th meeting that you have here for the hearing. And I want to emphasize that this is not land development. So this is strictly, you're going to see conceptual designs, and people may want to get into, well, what's going to happen with this house or that house, or how's it going to be constructed? We'll get into land development most likely after the new year. This is strictly for the conditional use only, and will the use be allowed based on the hearing we will have here on November 15th. So we don't have to have too much of a discussion. We can, but I just wanted to at least introduce Pannoni's review letter that they gave here and a conceptual sketch of the design right now for your information for November 15th.
You
Thank
can
you.
also mention that The planning commission meets tomorrow night.
Yep,
Like, planning commission does meet tomorrow night
Yeah.
at November 2nd, 7 PM.
yep.
Well, I don't.
Okay, thank you. All right, understanding issues. Do you have anything on the Hershey's Mill Dam to report?
I do. Mark Miller and I had a conference call this morning, and I'm happy to report we did get the as-built from the contractor.
Good.
So the surveyor went out, did them. What we're doing there is we're comparing the grading of what was built to the design grade. So we went over that this morning. We have some of the, overall it looked good. We just have some small tweaks we need them to make with the grading in certain areas. Wasn't anything out of the ordinary that we didn't expect. And we have a meeting in a couple of weeks to go over that on site with the contractor. And they will do the punch list as necessary.
How about Milltown Dam?
Milltown, I do not, because it is still in, the bid documents are still with DCNR and the Army Corps being reviewed.
Okay,
I did follow up via email with them today.
Michelle, get
And
ready to get on your
looking-
phone.
Yeah, yeah. Mommy's gonna whip them.
give me the number there.
So we are hopeful to have
Call
a
them
better
tomorrow.
update soon. Yeah.
Uh,
Um,
next time, would you put the other project on the Hershey's Mill Estates
The sewer
sewer
project.
project?
I can do that, yes. And
Please.
well, on that topic, the first advertisement for that went out today. And it'll be advertised again next week with a bid opening sometime in December. It's
You're,
December
you're
9th.
doing a great job, but
Awesome.
you gotta tell us about it.
I don't like
Yes, that is
bragging.
a standing issue.
And also the municipal authority minutes are a good source too as well. If
They
you want
are.
to read through those, it'll give you some pretty good updates.
And I'll give Mark kudos for reaching out to the homeowners association, Hershey's Mill Estates, and keeping them informed of,
Oh, good,
projected activity.
of
Good,
course.
good.
Yeah,
Is
we,
there any other matter?
we do not have any update yet on the grants for the Hershey Mill Estates project as well
Okay.
as the other ones. And nothing on the Chester County ARPA funds either yet.
Okay, thank
Mark
you.
said that they had pipe in though, didn't they?
Oh, they ordered the, it's in, it's
They
in
ordered,
the, it's in
oh, yeah.
the,
Well, we
Okay.
had to order the
in the
pipe. yeah.
compound.
Yeah.
We ordered the pipe to lock it in and get
We-
that, so we have it on site and
Yeah.
it's ready to go.
This project
It's
was
just,
going
we
no matter
can't, we
what.
can't go out to bid. We can't go out to bid and sign contracts. Otherwise we'll lose the grant money if we were awarded it.
We just inventoried the pipe, so we had it because of the increasing prices, increasing monthly.
Yeah, and that way we can separate the cost of the materials from the actual bid itself.
Okay.
The refuse fund, we
Mhm.
did actually finish the application for that. I wanted to update everybody, especially since Brian's
Oh,
here.
yeah,
So we went out for the 902 grant and that was done, what did we do, last Friday?
the
Oh,
lidded,
good.
for the lidded
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 recycling.
toters,
recycling
yep.
toters, yep.
So
So that application went in, and when will we expect to hear from them?
When did she say?
I thought she said December,
Okay,
early January, maybe.
Yeah,
all right.
she'll know, but she won't really be able to tell us until January. I think.
Okay. Any other matter? Public comments? Here in the room or in the Zoom room? Everybody's gone from the Zoom room. Liaison reports? And no correspondence. Cody?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make the motion to adjourn.
Second motion.
Those in
Cody.
favor?
Cody, have you
Aye.
ever thought